It's a big mistake to underestimate the Russians. They're actually quite serious about defending their country, which is what they demonstrated when they went into eastern Ukraine. But I think the important thing to keep in mind with these nuclear missiles is as follows. If you try to enter Russian sovereign territory on the ground with any European or American military formations, if you strike us on the ground, anything that is significant, we have the capability to annihilate you, and we will use it. And we will start at the tactical level with tactical nuclear weapons, and we'll work our way up as needed. They're not about to back down and leave Ukraine under any circumstances, and they're certainly not interested in a war. If they were, we'd have been at war with Russia a long time ago. That's obvious. But they're not going to sit there and pretend that they somehow or another are going to be intimidated by us. And we have nothing with which to challenge them. Our ground forces are in ruins. I'm sure you've seen the news with Macron, who stood up and turned himself into the proverbial turd in the punch bowl by suggesting that Europeans should be prepared to march into eastern Ukraine. There are 72,000 troops in the British Army. The French Army is a little larger, but these are boutique forces. They're all designed to essentially oppress people that can't defend themselves in North Africa or the Middle East or Africa itself. I mean, they don't have forces that are designed to fight anybody who can fight back. Scholz fancies himself of this Markian figure. And the German chancellor, certainly before World War I, was an enormously powerful figure. And he had great authority to do almost anything he wanted given to him by the emperor. So I think there's a certain amount of self-delusion involved with that. But he knows the Germans have no interest in this. Nobody in Europe has an interest in going to war in Ukraine. All of this is a proxy effort. What can we do to weaken Russia? You would think by now the fools would recognize that all they've done is strengthen Russia. Russia is stronger militarily now than it's been since the 1980s. Now they're showing you the latest tactical nuclear weapons, mobile nuclear missiles that can essentially hit any target they need to in Europe. They could vaporize airfields, ports, cities as needed. The other thing is we don't have any air defense. In other words, we talk about air and missile defense, but we really don't have much.
In the United States?
Well, both in the United States and in Europe. We've always depended on our air forces, and the underlying assumption has been that our air forces can penetrate anything and drop bombs with impunity and launch missiles with impunity. That's not really true anymore. The Russians are heavily invested in integrated air defenses, integrated air and missile defenses. They're quite prepared to deal with us if we rely exclusively on the Air Force. And to be blunt, that's all we've got right now.
Ooh, terrifying to think about. We talk about Star Wars of the 1980s. We talk about the Iron Dome in Israel, right? But the United States is sort of a sitting duck here. We can't even handle quote unquote Chinese spy balloons flying over Montana, for crying out loud. We panicked when Balloon Boy was up a number of years ago. Remember that famous story?
Yeah.
So it's unbelievable to me. I think a lot of people sort of sitting back going about their day-to-day business here, but NATO just keeps going, keeps expanding. Jens Stoltenberg last week telling Zelensky, long-range weapons, we're giving you the green light to attack inside of Russia. NATO membership for Sweden. This is moving right up to their back door. I mean, something has to give here. I mean, we're at this like boiling point moment here, and I don't know what do you think is going to give?
NATO is never so weak as when it appears to be strong. The more talk you hear about unity of effort and larger, more powerful NATO capabilities, the less seriously you should take any of these comments. You've got 32 states today constituting the so-called NATO alliance. Getting agreement on much of anything, including, which door do we use in the conference room to get to the bathroom, is impossible. There's no unity of thinking or effort at all. The whole sham alliance is designed to create avenues of approach for Europeans to us. It's another channel of communication to try and acquire U.S. favor and support and backing. These are all small countries today. They're much like the Greek city-states in the age of the Roman Empire. We're a sort of declining Rome at this point. I hope Americans will figure that out and act against it, but we're a declining Rome. The European states are like the little Greek city-states that were entirely dependent upon Roman military power to save them from the Macedonians. This whole business is a sham. NATO is probably not going to survive. I wouldn't pay any attention to any of it. I think Scholz knows that if he takes a stupid decision, let's send 3 German brigades, towards Belarusia, something like that, he'll be out of office. Not only will his political structure collapse, will the economy tank, but the whole NATO alliance will go out of business.
I want to ask you to put on your political hat for a moment. Of course, you served Donald Trump. at the Pentagon, and you see what's happening now in an election year. You see this back and forth fighting over Ukraine aid. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, saying, look, I'm not giving up this leverage. That seems to me the only leverage they have right now, Republicans have, which is this Ukraine aid to try to get something done at the U.S. southern border. But at the end of the day, Victoria Nuland says, I see Congress passing this money. There's going to be another $60 billion that'll flow to Ukraine. What do you think is going to happen in Washington? Will this aid get passed, moved towards Ukraine?
On one hand, Victoria Nuland is referring to the structure of power in Washington, which is entirely in the hands of the great lobby and lobbies.
Right.
In other words, not just the Israel lobby, the defense lobby, any number of wealthy billionaire oligarchs that have bought up politicians for years. They are ultimately making policy in Washington, D.C. So she's banking on that working.
You know Trump very well. If he becomes president again, clearly it looks like he's going to win the Republican nomination unless something crazy happens with Nikki Haley and the deep state wanting to install her in his stead. But if he becomes the Republican nominee and if he goes on to win the election and you were to advise the president, what would you advise him to do on Ukraine?
Well, as far as Ukraine is concerned, I would immediately announce the suspension of all aid to the Ukrainian regime, to Zelensky. Then privately, through channels, I would let Moscow know that we're interested in settling this issue as quickly as possible. Let us know when and where you want to meet, and we'll help settle this issue. And I would inform all of our NATO allies of the same thing. So that's the way you handle Ukraine. It's not going to happen overnight. I know he says, well, I can stop this in 24 hours. But even if you told the Russians you were going to do that, they'd wait for 2 weeks to see whether or not you did it.
Right.
There's no reason for them to believe us.
Well, they know in the Tucker Carlson interview they've been lied to multiple times. Promises made by Bill Clinton, promises made by George W. Bush, promises made over and over again that have been broken. So they're going to sit back and wait to see if this is a legitimate move or not. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to watch what Donald Trump does on these big issues.